Hi everyone, it's Anja here. As part of my lockdown reading, I've just finished this rather smart little book from the library collection. I wanted to share it with you and introduce you to one of the most prolific authors of the early 20th century, who pops up throughout Bromley House. The book is English Leaves, and it's a compendium of short essays by E.V. Lucas, written in 1933. Edward Verrill Lucas was one of 7 children of a Quaker family from Eltham in Kent. He was born in June 1868. Following an apprenticeship with a bookseller in Brighton, Lucas started working as a journalist. He published his first volume of poetry in 1890 and soon moved to London to continue his career. In 1897 he married Elizabeth Griffin, the daughter of a US Army colonel, and they had one daughter, Audrey. This picture was taken in the early 1900s, when Lucas was in his mid-30s. His family roots led to a commission for a biography of the Quaker poet Bernard Barton, and this in turn prompted a role as editor of a new edition of the works of Charles Lamb, together with a biography. These volumes were published between 1903 and 1905 and were very well received. Meanwhile, in 1904, Lucas joined the staff of Punch magazine, where he continued to work until his death in 1938, taking the role of assistant editor in later years. He also had a long-standing association with the publisher Methuen & Co., being a reader for the firm from 1908 to 1924, at which point he was appointed chairman. In later life he received honorary degrees from Oxford and St Andrews Universities, and he was appointed a Companion of Honour in 1932 for his services to literature. E.V. Lucas was an incredibly prolific author, publishing nearly 100 books in his lifetime. We have examples of his work in almost all the corners of Bromley House. His works on Charles Lamb are up in the attics. He also wrote a dozen novels, a number of which can be found in the George Green Room, as well as a few plays which we don't have. His wife Elizabeth was an author too, and they collaborated on various works, including this beautiful book of games and pastimes from 1929, which we hold as part of the Alan Sillitoe collection in the Thoroton Room. Lucas also wrote non-fiction, and there are many examples of his travel writing in the library collection, including his popular A Wanderer Inn series. These can be found in the Neville Hoskins Room. The largest collection of his writings, however, is up on the gallery, under the shelf marked DD for miscellaneous. That section of the library where all the slightly unusual and difficult to classify works end up. These are his collections of light essays or comment pieces. During his lifetime, Lucas wrote many hundreds of these short vignettes, the majority of which were originally published in Punch or other similar periodicals. They were then gathered together into books, of which we have over 20 in the library collection. This type of compendium of short commentary seems to have been very popular in the interwar years of the early 20th century, and there are examples in the collection by a number of familiar authors of the time, including A. Milne, J.B. Priestley and H.G. Wells, all those authors who went by their first 2 initials. Lucas's contributions to this genre are light and witty and cover a great many subjects. I've read 4 of these collections over the last couple of years, and this is the category which English Leaves falls into. In many ways, English Leaves is typical of Lucas's collections of light essays. It contains 12 essays on a variety of topics, and the writing is light, agreeable and witty. It is somewhat atypical, however, in that the essays in this volume are loosely bound by a shared category, a celebration of England. There are pieces on some of the landmark cities of the country, such as Canterbury, Winchester and Salisbury, as well as reminiscences of life in the home counties in the late Victorian period, an article on the garden champion Gertrude Jekyll, and 2 essays on the history of cricket, that most English of games. Cricket was something of an obsession for Lucas, and he published a few works specifically on that subject, one of which we have in Bromley House. Unfortunately, I'm only mildly interested in cricket, so I found the descriptions of great players and games of the late 19th century rather tedious, I'm afraid. The other essays in the book are more interesting, though, bringing alive the history, architecture and atmosphere of parts of southern England in the early 1930s. And that is one of the main attractions of these books for me. Inadvertently, in musing over aspects of his daily life, E.V. Lucas provides fascinating insights into the minutiae of the history of that period. Essays about air travel or photography, for instance, are made especially interesting by the fact that they are about air travel or photography in the 1930s. And Lucas is happy to write about very mundane things too. In fact, in one of the other volumes I've read, he notes that a friend had joked that he could write about literally anything and challenged him to write a piece on a matchbox, which he did. I found it really interesting too. English Leaves includes some of these intriguing details of the past, such as a depiction of the sorts of displays you might see in Winchester Museum at that time, or a description of a good country pub overlooking Salisbury. However, it does also include some less appealing aspects. For all his charm, Lucas does sometimes have a tendency to slip over into sentimentality, especially when he's describing scenes from his early life. English Leaves has rather too much of this twee nostalgia, most notably in a piece romanticising the innocent, hearty milkmaids of his youth and bemoaning the spread of mechanical milking, with no thought for the huge improvements to efficiency and quality of life which those innovations have brought. E.V. Lucas is nothing if not middle class. However, the pieces are all written with characteristic charm, so, although not quite as engaging as some of the other collections I've read, I still enjoyed English Leaves. This final picture is the frontispiece of the biography of E.V. Lucas, written by his daughter Audrey in 1939, which we also have in the Bromley House collection. It can be found up in the attics. The photograph shows him aged about 50, and seems an appropriate way to round off this little introduction to this interesting and prolific writer.